The engine died at 4 a.m. No warning, no signal, nothing. Just silence on a frozen highway. The driver sat there, breath turning to fog. Outside, the temperature read minus 47 degrees Celsius. Not wind chill, the actual air temperature. He was 70 kilometers from the nearest town. His phone showed 0 bars of signal. This is the reality of winter trucking in Canada. Most people think breakdowns are just inconvenient. They imagine calling a tow truck, waiting an hour, but the real danger is far more brutal than that. In extreme cold, a broken truck becomes a countdown. Every minute without heat matters. Every decision could mean life or death. Most viewers assume truckers just wait for help. They think it's simple, like a car on the highway. But an 18-wheeler stranded in Arctic conditions is different. The truck itself becomes both shelter and enemy. Diesel fuel starts to gel below minus 40. Fuel lines can freeze solid within 20 minutes. Batteries lose up to 60% of their power in extreme cold. Even a fully charged battery can die fast. Without the engine running, cabin heat disappears quickly. Temperature inside the cab can drop below freezing in under an hour. This is not an exaggeration. This is basic Canadian trucking survival math. Truckers who don't understand this don't survive long in this job. Let's break the biggest myth first. Most people believe truckers panic when they break down. They picture chaos, fear, frantic phone calls. The truth is the opposite. Experienced Canadian truckers train for this exact moment. They know panic burns energy and body heat. Calm thinking saves lives in sub-zero conditions. The first rule taught in cold weather trucking courses is simple. Do not leave the truck. The cab is warmer than the outside world even without power. Walking for help in minus 40 is almost always fatal. Search and rescue teams confirm this every winter. Most cold weather deaths happen when people leave their vehicle. So step 1 is always the same. Stay inside, stay calm, assess the situation. Now let's go deeper into what actually happens during a breakdown. Canadian truckers carry emergency kits worth almost $400 CAD. These kits are not optional. They are survival tools. Inside you'll find insulated sleeping bags rated for minus 40. Chemical hand warmers that last up to 10 hours. High-calorie emergency food bars packed with 3,000 calories each. A battery-powered emergency beacon for satellite tracking. And a small propane heater as backup warmth. Professional carriers in Alberta and Saskatchewan mandate these kits by law. Without one, a driver risks fines up to $1,200. But more importantly, without one, a driver risks their life. The truck's engine is the real lifeline in a breakdown. As long as it runs, the cab stays warm. This is why truckers try everything to restart a dead engine. Block heaters are used to keep engines warm overnight. These plug into the truck and warm the oil and coolant. Without one, starting an engine below minus 30 is nearly impossible. Diesel engines need oil viscosity within a certain range to ignite. At extreme cold, oil turns thick, almost like syrup. This is why so many trucks won't start on brutal mornings. Truckers check weather reports obsessively before entering remote highways. The Yellowhead Highway, the Trans-Canada, and Highway 97 are notorious routes. These stretches can go for over 100 kilometers without services. No gas stations. No cell towers, no help nearby. This is why breakdown protocol is drilled into every rookie driver. When a truck finally does break down on one of these remote stretches, the first 90 seconds matter more than almost anything else in the entire ordeal. Dispatch protocols across most major Canadian carriers require drivers to immediately activate hazard lights and place reflective triangles at set distances behind the vehicle, usually one at 10 meters, one at 30 meters, and one at 100 meters. This isn't just regulation for the sake of regulation. On highways like the Yellowhead or the Coquihalla, visibility during a snow squall can drop to under 20 meters, and a stalled rig without proper warning markers becomes a fatal hazard for oncoming traffic moving at highway speed. Fleet safety officers in Alberta estimate that improperly marked breakdowns contribute to a measurable percentage of secondary collisions every winter season, where a second vehicle slams into the first before anyone even has a chance to react. Once the truck is marked and secured, the driver's next move is almost always a radio call rather than a phone call. This surprises a lot of people who assume truckers rely entirely on cell service. In reality, most long-haul carriers equip their trucks with CB radios and increasingly with satellite communicators, precisely because cell coverage across northern British Columbia, the Yukon Corridor, and large sections of Saskatchewan is either spotty or non-existent. A satellite messenger device, often costing the company somewhere around $500 to $600 CAD per unit, plus a monthly subscription, can send an exact GPS location to dispatch even when there isn't a single bar of signal. Dispatchers then calculate the nearest available service truck, which on some remote Canadian routes can be more than 150 kilometers away, meaning response times can stretch past 2 hours even under ideal conditions. Those 2 hours are where the real survival math kicks in. Without the engine running, a truck cab loses heat at a rate that depends heavily on insulation quality, wind exposure, and how well the door seals are holding up against ice buildup. Studies conducted by cold weather vehicle engineers suggest that an unheated cab in minus 40-degree conditions can lose the majority of its retained warmth within 45 to 60 minutes. This is precisely why the sleeping bags in a driver's emergency kit are rated so aggressively low, because they are designed to be the last line of defense once the cab itself can no longer hold usable heat. Drivers are trained to layer their clothing before this point ever arrives, adding insulated coveralls, thermal socks, and a second pair of gloves the moment the engine stops responding, rather than waiting until the cold becomes unbearable. Fuel gelling is another factor that deep freeze breakdowns bring into play, and it's more complex than most people realize. Standard diesel fuel starts forming wax crystals around minus 15 degrees Celsius, which is why Canadian fuel suppliers blend in additives and switch to winter-grade diesel blends once temperatures drop seasonally. Winter diesel, sometimes blended with up to 50% kerosene in the harshest regions, can resist gelling down to nearly minus 40 degrees, but even that has limits. When temperatures fall below that threshold, as they regularly do in parts of northern Alberta and the Northwest Territories, fuel lines can clog regardless of the blend, leaving a truck that started perfectly fine 6 hours earlier suddenly unable to draw fuel at all. Some carriers now install fuel line heaters, small electric elements wrapped around the fuel line and powered by the truck's battery, specifically to combat this exact failure point. Though these add another few $100s to a truck's winterization cost, battery performance compounds the entire problem. Lead-acid batteries, still standard in most heavy-duty trucks, lose a significant percentage of their cranking power in extreme cold, and that lost power doesn't return just because the temperature happens to warm slightly during the day. A battery that reads healthy in October can fail completely by January if it isn't properly maintained, tested, and in some cases swapped for a cold weather-rated unit before the season even begins. This is why many Canadian fleets run battery health checks as part of a mandatory pre-winter inspection, an inspection that can cost a carrier upwards of $150 per truck, but is treated as non-negotiable across the industry. Weather itself adds another brutal layer to every breakdown story. Environment Canada issues extreme cold warnings once wind chill values pass roughly minus 40, and on exposed highway sections like those crossing the prairies or winding through mountain passes, wind chill can push the effective temperature down by an additional 10 to 15 degrees beyond the actual air reading. A driver stepping outside even briefly to check tire chains or clear a frozen mirror is exposing bare skin to frostbite risk within minutes, sometimes less. Experienced drivers know to check exposed skin constantly, watching for the telltale white waxy patches that signal frostbite is setting in, because in these conditions, frostbite can begin before a person even feels significant pain. All of this, the radios, the fuel heaters, the layered clothing, the reflective triangles, exist because of one simple truth the industry has learned the hard way. On a remote Canadian highway in deep winter, help is never as close as it feels, and the truck itself is the only real shelter for miles in any direction. Carriers that operate across the northern routes budget winterization costs per vehicle that can exceed $2,000 CAD annually, covering block heaters, battery upgrades, fuel additives, and emergency equipment. It's an expense many companies once viewed as optional. Today it's treated as the difference between a routine delay and a tragedy that makes the evening news. And this is where the story takes a turn most people don't expect. You'd think the biggest danger in a breakdown is the cold itself. It isn't. Fleet safety data from several Canadian trucking associations points to something else entirely: decision fatigue. Drivers who have been awake for 16, 18, sometimes 20 hours before a breakdown occurs are far more likely to make the fatal mistake of leaving the truck, because exhaustion clouds judgment in ways that mimic panic. The cold doesn't kill most stranded truckers directly. Poor decisions made by exhausted minds do. That's the twist nobody talks about. The real enemy isn't minus 47 degrees outside, It's the human mind trying to function on empty after a full day behind the wheel. Behind every one of these breakdown stories is a person, not just a statistic. Most truckers driving these northern routes aren't chasing adventure. They're chasing a paycheck, supporting a family somewhere hundreds of kilometers away, sending money home for a mortgage or a kid's hockey registration or a parent's medical bills. When a truck stalls at 4 a.m. in the middle of nowhere, that driver isn't just fighting the cold. They're thinking about whether they'll make it home for their daughter's birthday, whether the load will arrive on time, whether this job is worth what it's costing their body and their sleep. Canadian trucking culture doesn't talk about this enough. Behind the toughness, behind the block heaters and the emergency kits and the practiced calm, there's a quiet exhaustion that most drivers carry alone, mile after mile, winter after winter. That's what makes this job different from almost any other. It's not just physical endurance, it's mental isolation, hour after hour, broken only by static on a CB radio and the hope that the engine turns over one more time. The next time you see a transport truck battling through a snowstorm on a Canadian highway, remember there's a person in that cab who's trained for exactly this moment, who's carrying gear that could save their life, and who's doing it so a delivery arrives on time and a family gets by another week. If this story gave you a new respect for what these drivers go through, let us know in the comments. Have you ever seen a truck stranded on a winter highway, or do you know someone who drives these routes? Drop your story below. Hit like if you want more real stories from the road, and subscribe if you want to keep riding along with us through the toughest highways in the country. There's a lot more out there most people never see, and we're just getting started.